If you guys enjoy what I do, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe. It really helps the channel and it's free and easy to do. Welcome to my channel where we cover the lore of Final Fantasy XIV. We cover the stories both big and small, the epic and the cute, the silly and the tragic. I hope you all enjoy the ride, and welcome to the Chronicler of Lore. Back in Rauga's Reach, the Warrior of Light shows up just in time for Jessie to tell her that another anomaly was detected at the Yawn, which means that Omega is ready for you again. That also means you don't have all that long to wait before Omega decides to attack the world. Cid's been working hard on figuring out how to deal with the Murderbot, and since he still hasn't shown up, Jessie lets you know what he's been working on. After your last run-in with Omega, Cid had some research notes smuggled in from Garlemald. All of the papers were things left behind by Cid's father, Midas, who was basically the Empire's top engineer and the one who had built the tower meant to harness the power of Dalamud, which led to the destruction of Bastia. Cid was supposed to take his father's position as the chief engineer, but after the Bastia incident, he decided to leave Garlemald altogether. He had never liked how they operated anyway, and the Bastia incident was the last straw. But since things are getting desperate, Cid must have decided that the knowledge that had been used to make the lunar transmitter might be the only thing that can solve the Omega problem, because if Cid is willing to do one thing, it's whatever it takes to solve a problem. Cid finally shows up after Jessie tells you everything, which means it's time to head to the Yawn. Unfortunately, Biggs, Wedge, and Nero are still in no condition to help, neither is Midgard Sormer. Jessie volunteers to join you, but Cid needs her to finish the device he was working on. While she heads off to do that, you, Cid, and Alpha head to the Yawn. Cid does have a plan, but the only way to know if it'll work is to test it, so the three of you dive back into the interdimensional rift. More of Omega's test worlds are gone, meaning his experiments are nearly over. Out of the 89 groups he tested, only 4 had survived. Omega pitted them against each other, and now only 1 is left. And you will face off against that world. If you win, then you'll face Omega, so he can finally figure out how you keep beating opponents who are so much stronger than you are. That way he can add that ability to his own repertoire. This time Omega won't put you through the evaluation process since he already knows your strength level, but he does declare that Alpha's part in this is all officially over, since Omega will personally give you access to the rift. But whether he's needed for that or not, Alpha's a part of the crew, and Cid wants him with you. Omega can't understand why you would want Alpha along since he's now useless, not to mention the fact that Alpha was originally made to be bait to lure you into Omega's domain, which worked out quite well. For some reason, Cid and the Warrior of Light hadn't figured that out, but it's not Alpha's fault. The little chocobo has no memories of anything that happened before he met you. He was the first thing Omega had made in the rift, and it was his only attempt at making something based off of an ordinary life form that had managed to beat an enemy that was nearly as strong as Omega himself. He wanted to watch Alpha to figure out how that was even possible, but despite him repeating the experiment 1,000 times, Alpha simply died, which led Omega to make his current test with you. So he erased Alpha's memories and planted the command to come back into the rift, then he sent him out into the world. Since weak creatures like to form groups to survive, he figured Alpha would gather test subjects for him. And it worked like a charm, despite the fact that Omega's ability to create things wasn't meant to be used to make life forms. The ability was meant to be used to improve Omega's weapons and armor, but nothing prevents him from using it in the way that he has. But Cid knows the dangers of using technology for things outside of its original purpose. It never turns out the way it's supposed to, which is why all of Omega's test subjects have been weaker than they should have been. His creations could never replicate the things that had motivated their original selves to achieve great or terrible things, nor could it copy the strong desires that the heroes had to use to overcome their enemies. Which is why nothing Omega makes will ever be able to beat you, at least according to Cid. That still remains to be seen, so after Cid gets the base camp ready, it's time to get ready to dive into the final test world. Omega didn't even bother trying to hide who you were fighting. Your opponent is Chaos, the main villain from Final Fantasy I, and a name I'm sure you've heard over and over in the Stranger of Paradise trailer. It makes perfect sense that Chaos was the winner of Omega's little contest, and it definitely won't be an easy fight. But before you head off to kill Chaos, Sid has to assure Alpha that regardless of what Omega said, your current situation isn't his fault. It was you all who woke Omega up in the first place, which means if it's anyone's fault, it's Sid's. The little chocobo still feels bad, but Sid gives him the job of keeping the teapot full with his magic card, and that makes him feel better, so it's off to fight Chaos you go. Chaos isn't nearly as difficult to overpower as he should have been, proving that Sid was right to think that Omega could not create creatures nearly as powerful as they would have been in their original realities. Regardless, you've won, completing Omega's experiment and proving yourself to be the superior warrior. But the robot still can't understand how you do what you do, which makes him start to believe that Sid was right about his creations being flawed. He begins to wonder if mortals simply have an ability that he can't measure, but he can't accept that, and decides to examine you from a different angle. He sends you to a new place that he creates from his own memories, a place where he fought an enemy like none he'd ever faced before, one that he never got to beat. He can't recreate it exactly, but he comes close. Since he couldn't defeat this opponent, if you lose, Omega will still fight you. If you survive, that is. Which is unlikely, since you're about to face off against Omega's version of Midgard-Sormer himself, one that is nearly as strong as he had been on the Dragonstar. Omega wants you to fight the dragon right away, but since you just had a fight with Chaos and aren't at full strength, Omega listens to Sid and allows you to head back to your base camp to rest, where you find Alpha standing there with a very invisible Sid. Apparently, whatever Alpha had used to make the tea caused Sid to turn invisible. Fortunately, it turns out to be temporary. They really need to study Alpha's cards, but first you have to figure out how to fight Midgard-Sormer. With what you've learned from Omega, it's pretty clear that both the dragon and Omega come from other worlds that were at war with one another, which is what made the dragon grab his children and leave the Dragonstar with Omega chasing him. What you're up against is the younger, more savage version of the dragon that Omega remembers. Even though you've squared off against the dragon in the past, this is definitely going to be different. And since Omega created this battle on the spur of the moment, Sid can't even use the monitors to learn anything. So instead of wasting time while you fight the dragon, Sid will go to make preparations for the battle with Omega. So all you have to do is fight a version of the father of the first brood and not die. The fact that this version of Midgard-Sormer is not at his full power in this form is very good because you wouldn't have beaten him otherwise, and very bad because if at his full power he couldn't take down Omega, the Warrior of Light is probably going to die. Sid watched your battle while he worked, and he noticed that Omega's version of Midgard-Sormer looked a lot like Shinryu, which isn't all that strange since Shinryu wasn't summoned with any particular belief system to dictate how he looked. When he was summoned, he was meant to be a being as powerful as Bahamut, and apparently that made him take the form of the oldest dragon on Hydaelyn. It's not important, Sid just finds it ironic that summoning Shinryu led back to Omega, meaning you were seeing history repeat itself, at least a little bit. Regardless, you've passed the final test, so Omega shuts down all of his test worlds and transfers all of his power back into himself so he can test you properly. It seems like a battle you're destined to lose, but Sid thinks he knows Omega's weakness, and he's been working on something that should let you take advantage of it. He just needs a little more time to get ready. Always being one to use every tool at his disposal, he plans on making use of Alpha's cards too if it comes down to that. Aside from what looks like junk that the little chocobo keeps with him in places that I don't plan on trying to figure out, he has one card that looks like it either makes you bigger or smaller. Since he's not all that sure how it works, Sid thinks it'll be better to let Alpha decide when it's the best time to use it, which doesn't ease the little guy's worries at all. As a last bit of backup, Sid fills up a vial with Alpha's turn you invisible teapot water, just in case it has a purpose. With the preparations made, and a little pep talk for the chocobo that gets him fired up, you all head out of the rift to get Sid's device from Jesse. You follow Sid back to the Reach, where even though his device is ready, his hand trembles when he reaches for it because he's still traumatized by what his father had done when he'd used that particular bit of tech. Nero comes to talk to his old friend despite the fact that he's supposed to be in bed, and like Sid, Nero already figured out Omega's weakness. When he'd fought Shinryu, the only thing that had made it through Omega's defenses was a burst of lightning, so electricity can do some real damage. But it has to be a serious burst of electricity, like enough energy to, say, wipe out a city, which is why Sid is having an issue. When his father had made a link between the lunar transmitter and Dalamud, he came up with a method of gathering and storing massive amounts of energy, and that's what you'll need to beat Omega. Sid's improved his father's device as best he could, so it should be safe, but he can't stop thinking about the Basha incident every time he looks at the thing. He still sees the dead bodies and how the Empire's leaders didn't care at all. The biggest problem is that all of the death and destruction was caused by technology that was meant to help people, which is why he left and vowed only to build things that helped people. But the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and regardless of what he's wanted to do, there's always a way for things to go south, and he has to think about them and plan for them, which is the complete opposite of how he used to be. But even though he's changed, his overthinking has caused problems too. As usual, Nero solves Cid's mental dilemma with a very simple solution. Omega is all about testing people to find out what's the best way to do things. Cid can use the same method on himself. He feels that his new, more cautious way of doing things is superior to the old Cid. If that's the case, then the device he's made should be enough to stop Omega, because the old Cid would have been able to build something that could do the job. So basically, if you survive, Cid's new way is superior. If not, you all die. That should make Cid more nervous, but his hands stop shaking, so it's time to head back into the rift. Cid gives the Warrior of Light the control switch for the item he uncreatively named the Omega Jammer, so you can throw massive bursts of lightning at the robot with a little help from Cid, and you step into the arena to do battle with Omega. As expected, Omega is incredibly powerful, but with Cid's Omega Jammer, the Warrior of Light manages to beat the robot. Omega analyzes your fighting style and the sporadic, unpredictable way you fight, along with the random bursts of strength at critical moments, which reminds him of Midgardsormr, but the immeasurable changes seem stronger in weak creatures like yourself, which doesn't make sense to him. There has to be something special about you, and Omega's programming demands that he adds the ability to himself, which means he needs to approach the problem from a different angle. He needs to change his own physical structure, and he'll need to collapse the rift to do it. Unfortunately for you and Cid, there's nothing but the void outside of the rift. If it collapses, the two of you will die, which is Omega's plan. He can't have you alive to attack him while he remodels his body. You were good test subjects, but you're replaceable. He'll just send Alpha out to find new ones once he's done changing. Omega and the rift vanish, leaving you, Alpha, and Cid alone in the void. Alpha, being one of Omega's creations, is built to be able to find his creator, so he races to where the robot is. Omega believes that you and Cid died when the rift collapsed, but using a combination of Alpha's invisibility T and his shrinking card, the two of you shrank down and rode the little chocobo back to Omega. Alpha, the thing that Omega thought was useless, is the only reason you're still alive. The fact that Alpha went to such lengths to save you is something Omega can't understand, but having you there allows him to finish his tests. He completes his transformation and emerges in his new body, a very human-looking body. Apparently he decided that your form was superior, so he decided to use it for himself to learn his secrets, and the fight won't end until he does. Omega spends the fight learning his new body, including switching genders to see how differently each body moves. When you push each body to the limit, Omega decides that fighting you as a team might be more effective. Even fighting you as a group, Omega couldn't beat you, and even in defeat, he still can't understand how you do what you do. He can't understand Alpha either. Somehow, without fighting you, the little chocobo has become like you, gaining the ability to overcome great obstacles that should be too much for him. The thing that Omega can't understand is the human soul. It's something that no amount of fighting could teach. It was something that he could have learned if he had worked with you like Alpha did. Omega finally begins to understand the source of your power, and he wonders if he had it, would he be able to make it back home? But that's the opposite of how the human spirit and will works. If he could truly understand what it meant to be human, he would know that trying to take a journey that long would break the strongest will. Staring up towards his home, Omega finally understands and dies, which leads to the next problem. The rift starts to collapse. Fortunately for you, Biggs and Wedge come riding in on the back of Racevelga, sent of course by Midgardsormr to save the day. For his entire life, Midgardsormr had never asked Racevelga for anything, so he likely sent him to make up for the fact that he had led Omega to your world in the first place. Unfortunately, there's no telling how long it will take for the dragon to recover, but he's still watching the world while he sleeps. He had formed a bond with his new home, and he will continue to look after it. That help allowed you to survive your victory over Omega, something Cid is not going to complain about. With that situation resolved, you all head back to Rhalgr's Reach, while Biggs tells you how the two of them had come to the Yawn to help when they saw the ether in the pit bubbling like crazy. They were gonna jump in, which would have definitely killed them when Racevelger showed up and offered to give them a ride, and the rest is history. Back at the Reach, after hearing about what you did, Jesse figures that what they will do if another Omega shows up is just build another U to send after it. But that's a problem for another day. For now, the other Alliance leaders are eager to hear what happened with Omega. Sid plans on telling them everything, although it's doubtful they'll believe the story. What the Warrior of Light needs is rest, and as for Alpha, after taking him for a walk around Rauger's Reach, the little Chocobo decides to go on an adventure of his own to see the world with his own eyes. And after a tearful goodbye, the little Chocobo heads off to see the world with a little Omega model that Biggs and Wedge had built that may have more of the real Omega in it than they think. This concludes the story of Omega. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button, subscribe, ding that notification bell, join the Discord, and if you really want to show your support, sign up to become a member of the channel. Until next time guys, later.